where Chinese weapons and artillery have been making their way. In the latest, Burkina Faso's armed forces have received a fresh consignment of Chinese-manufactured armored vehicles and artillery pieces. This, as the junta-led nation pushes to strengthen its military against terrorism.
It's not highways or railways this time. It's armored convoys rolling into Africa's most dangerous frontline. And they're stamped Made in China. 4 years, when people thought about China and Africa, the images that came to mind were familiar. Gleaming highways stretching across arid landscapes, deep water ports swallowing container ships, and shiny new railways cutting through the heart of the continent. It was a trade. It was infrastructure. It was constructed on a scale Africa hadn't seen in decades. But now, something new is moving across the continent. Something painted in camouflage, armored in steel, and mounted with heavy firepower. Beijing has found a new frontier in Africa: defense. And the most striking example of this shift is playing out in one of the most dangerous corners of the world, the Sahel. In this video, we are going to look at how China has shifted from building Africa's roads to arming its battlefields. In Burkina Faso, under Captain Ibrahim Troaré, Chinese-made armored vehicles have arrived, not as aid, but as a strategic defense investment in the Sahel. We'll explore why Ouagadougou turned east for firepower, the specific weapons China delivered, and how this deal signals a larger geopolitical shift across Africa. This isn't just about one nation's security, it's about a continent redefining its military alliances in the middle of a global arms race. In Burkina Faso, a nation battling relentless terrorist attacks, a convoy of fresh, battle-ready armored vehicles has rolled in, not from Paris, not from Washington, but straight from Beijing. And if you want to know why this matters, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa's future security, stick around, because this story is rewriting the continent's military map. The Sahel is more than a strip of land on a political map. It's a sprawling belt that runs along the southern edge of the Sahara Desert, stretching thousands of kilometers from Senegal in the west to Sudan in the east. On one side, the scorching, unyielding sands of the Sahara. On the other, greener savannas struggling to resist desertification. It's a place where geography shapes destiny, a meeting point between farmers and herders, between settled communities and nomadic tribes, between cultures, languages, and religions. And for decades, this fragile balance has been under siege. Since the early 2000s, the Sahel has become a breeding ground for insurgencies. Terrorist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS exploit porous borders and political instability, using motorcycles and pickup trucks to move fast and strike harder than under-equipped local forces can respond. The violence is merciless. Markets have been attacked in broad daylight. Schools burned to the ground. Villages wiped off the map. Over 4 million people across the Sahel are now displaced, many living in overcrowded camps with little food or security. Burkina Faso, once considered a relatively calm neighbor to Mali and Niger, has been drawn deep into this storm. Since 2015, armed groups have pushed south from Mali, carving out territories in Burkina's north and east. But over time, the violence has spread, westward toward the borders with Ivory Coast and Ghana, and southward into forested zones where insurgents can hide more easily. In many rural communities, the sound of a distant engine or the dust cloud of approaching motorbikes sparks panic. For ordinary Burkina families, the fear isn't theoretical, it's daily life. When Captain Ibrahim Troaré seized power in September 2022, it was not with the polished smile of a career politician. It was with the fatigue of a soldier who had spent years in the mud and dust of Burkina's frontline. At just 34 years old, he became the youngest head of state in the world, and one of the most outspoken. His rise was fueled by frustration with a political class seen as out of touch, and with foreign partners who promised support but delivered little lasting security. Troaré didn't just want to fight the insurgency, he wanted to reimagine the country's entire approach to defense. By 2023, his government had announced a multi-phase military modernization program. This wasn't about bloating the army's ranks with undertrained recruits. It was about building a force that could move fast, hit hard, and survive the punishing conditions of the Sahel. Traoré's vision included rapid deployment units capable of chasing insurgents across rough terrain, Artillery systems with both reach and mobility. Armored vehicles tough enough to withstand ambushes and IED blasts. But modern armies don't just appear overnight, and modern equipment requires modern suppliers. That's where China entered the picture. In early 2025, videos began circulating online from Ouagadougou's military base. Parked in neat, intimidating rows were dozens of freshly delivered armored vehicles, each one gleaming under the West African sun, their camouflage patterns shifting between desert tans and jungle greens. The delivery came from Norinco, China's largest and most influential defense manufacturer, whose products arm militaries from Pakistan to Venezuela. And this was no token shipment. It was a serious arsenal designed for the specific demands of counterinsurgency in mixed terrain. Here's what Burkina Faso received. VN-22B fire support vehicles, wheeled, high-speed vehicles with heavy cannons. Ideal for rapid deployment in areas where tracked tanks would be too slow or heavy. They can cross rough terrain, respond quickly to intelligence, and keep up sustained fire in mobile operations. PLL-05 self-propelled gun mortars. These combine the precision of a mortar with the mobility of an armored vehicle. They can fire indirect shells over obstacles, then quickly relocate before insurgents can pinpoint their position. SR-5 multiple rocket launch systems, capable of launching guided and unguided rockets over long distances. These platforms can level insurgent camps or suppress enemy positions before troops move in. Each system serves a purpose: speed, mobility, and concentrated firepower. This wasn't a generic purchase. This was a tailored response to Burkina Faso's battlefield realities. The official price tag wasn't made public, but anyone watching Africa's arms market understands the appeal of Chinese deals. Affordability, compared to Western or even Russian hardware. Chinese systems often cost significantly less, making them accessible to countries with limited defense budgets. Speed of delivery, while Western procurement can take years, China can fulfill orders in a matter of months, crucial when insurgent groups are gaining ground. Flexible financing. Beijing often offers staggered payments or barter arrangements, sometimes tied to future resource deals. No political conditionality. Unlike the US or EU, China doesn't require governance reforms, human rights concessions, or policy changes as part of the arms package. For governments under urgent threat, this is an advantage. They get weapons without political strings. For Captain Troaré, this was more than a transaction. It was a statement. Burkina Faso would choose partners based on results, not ideology. The timing of the delivery was telling. Just days before Burkina Faso's shipment arrived, Mali had received its own convoy of Chinese armored vehicles. Video footage showed them moving through Guinea en route to Bamako, another sign that West African nations are looking east for their defense needs. Elsewhere, Ivory Coast is using Chinese armor for rapid border response teams. Gabon has deployed Chinese vehicles for both military patrols and internal security. Kenya has invested in Chinese-built MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, to safeguard troops from roadside bombs in counter-terror operations. The pattern is clear: quick delivery, affordable systems, immediate deployment. China isn't alone in this contest. Russia continues to supply fighter jets, helicopters, rifles, and even private military contractors to African allies. In countries like Mali and the Central African Republic, Russian presence has grown dramatically. Turkey has made a name for itself with the Bayraktar TB2 drone, a relatively low-cost, high-impact surveillance and strike platform now used by over 10 African nations. Turkish companies are also selling armored vehicles and training programs. This isn't just commerce, it's geopolitics in motion. Every shipment brings with it training teams, maintenance contracts, and often, political alliances that can last decades. For much of the post-colonial era, African armies relied heavily on France, the US, or the UK for weapons and training. But dissatisfaction has been growing, both with the conditional nature of Western aid and with the perceived ineffectiveness of those partnerships in actually ending conflicts. By turning to China, Russia, or Turkey, African nations gain immediate capability without the diplomatic baggage. But it's not without trade-offs. Chinese systems, for example, require Chinese parts, Chinese maintenance expertise, and in many cases, Chinese training. That dependency can be as binding as political conditions. For now, however, leaders like Troaré see it as a better bargain, one that keeps their sovereignty intact while improving their military readiness. What we're seeing in Burkina Faso is more than an arms purchase, it's a pivot. It's a signal to the world that the Sahel is no longer content to be armed and advised exclusively by old colonial powers. And it's a signal to insurgents that their opponents are no longer lightly equipped. But will this influx of Chinese firepower turn the tide? Or will it simply shift Africa into a new era of dependency? This time, not on Paris or Washington, but on Beijing? No matter how impressive the new hardware looks on a parade ground, one fact remains. Wars in the Sahel aren't fought and won purely through superior firepower. The roots of instability here run deep. Poverty that traps entire generations, chronic unemployment among youth, the slow but relentless effects of climate change, and political marginalization of communities living far from capital cities. Insurgent groups don't simply impose their will through fear. They fill the void left by absent governments. In some rural areas, extremists are the ones enforcing local rules, mediating disputes, and even collecting taxes. This is why soldiers armed with VN-22B fire support vehicles can clear a village in the morning, only for insurgents to return by nightfall. For Burkina Faso's new military investments to have lasting impact, they must be paired with governance reforms, local engagement, and economic opportunities. That's the paradox of modern counterinsurgency. You can't shoot your way to permanent peace, no matter how advanced your equipment is. One of the reasons Beijing is gaining ground in Africa's defense market is its pragmatism. Chinese arms deals are typically straightforward: deliver weapons, offer training, provide maintenance support, and keep politics out of the paperwork. For African leaders dealing with urgent threats, this is attractive. Western governments often tie military aid to commitments on human rights, democratic governance, or economic reforms. While these conditions are meant to encourage stability, they can also slow down urgent procurement and sour relationships when recipient governments feel patronized. China's no-strings-attached model avoids those delays. However, the absence of political conditions does not mean the absence of long-term influence. Once a country adopts Chinese platforms, tanks, artillery, or even communication systems, it locks itself into Chinese supply chains for parts, ammunition, and future upgrades. That's a dependency of a different kind. While China is making bold inroads, Russia and Turkey are not watching from the sidelines. Russia offers something China doesn't: combat-proven systems in conflicts similar to those in Africa. From heavy transport helicopters that can ferry troops into remote areas, to Su-25 ground attack jets capable of close air support, Russian hardware has a reputation for ruggedness and adaptability. In countries like Mali and the Central African Republic, Russian military advisors and private contractors are already deeply embedded. Turkey, meanwhile, has carved out a niche with its unmanned aerial vehicles. The Bayraktar TB2 drone has changed the way African armies think about surveillance and precision strikes. Instead of sending patrols into dangerous territory blindly, drones can scout, track, and even eliminate targets before ground troops move in. The TB2's relatively low cost and ease of operation make it especially appealing to nations balancing limited budgets with vast territories to secure. This growing competition means African leaders now have more choices than ever before, a reality that's changing the geopolitical calculus of the continent. For decades, Africa's military partnerships were dominated by the West. France, the United States, and the United Kingdom held the lion's share of influence. But the new reality is multipolar. Burkina Faso's decision to purchase from China is emblematic of a broader strategy emerging across the continent: diversify alliances, reduce dependency, and maximize leverage. By balancing relationships with multiple suppliers, China for armor, Turkey for drones, Russia for helicopters, a government can reduce the risk of being squeezed by any single partner. It also sends a message to former colonial powers: Africa is not the same geopolitical playing field it once was. Leaders like Troaré are openly rejecting one-sided relationships and are willing to make bold moves to prove it. But diversification comes with risks. Each major supplier comes with its own web of expectations and influence. Even if these expectations aren't spelled out in contracts, They often emerge later in the form of political favors, diplomatic alignments, or resource concessions. China, for instance, may not demand governance reforms, but it might seek preferential access to mining concessions, port facilities, or infrastructure contracts. Russia might expect political support in international forums. Turkey might leverage its defense deals to expand its cultural and economic footprint. For a country like Burkina Faso, already walking a tightrope between battling insurgents, managing internal politics, and navigating regional diplomacy, balancing these relationships will require as much skill as commanding a battlefield. One of the least glamorous, but most critical, aspects of any new defense acquisition is training. High-tech hardware is only as effective as the soldiers who operate it. Chinese vehicles like the VN-22B or SR-5 come with their own systems, controls, and maintenance requirements. Transitioning an army used to Soviet-era or French-made equipment to an entirely new platform is no small task. This is why Chinese arms deals almost always include training teams, military instructors who stay for months or even years to teach everything from driving and firing to maintenance and tactical deployment. In many cases, Burkina soldiers will have to train abroad, in Chinese facilities, before taking full control of the new systems. Integration is equally important. A flashy rocket system means little if it can't communicate with existing command structures, or if its range exceeds the Army's ability to gather accurate targeting intelligence. That's where partnerships in other areas, like drone reconnaissance from Turkey or satellite imagery from allies, become crucial. In Burkina Faso, the arrival of the Chinese convoy wasn't just a military event. It was a political and psychological one. For supporters of Troaré, it was proof that the government was taking decisive action to protect the people, breaking free from France's long shadow and forging new paths. For critics, it raised concerns about swapping one dependency for another. Some opposition voices question whether the government is mortgaging the country's future sovereignty for short-term gains in firepower. On the streets, however, the reaction was more visceral. The sight of shiny new armor, the sound of engines rumbling through the capital, it projected strength. And in a country where many feel the army has been outgunned for years, that symbolism is powerful. Burkina Faso's arms deal is being watched closely across West Africa. Neighboring governments, especially those also facing insurgencies, are likely to take notes. If the new hardware enables Burkina Faso to retake lost territory or significantly reduce attacks, it could spark a wave of similar purchases across the Sahel. This could, in turn, accelerate the shift away from Western dominance in Africa's defense market. France, already on the back foot after being asked to withdraw troops from several Sahelian nations, would see its influence diminish further. The US, too, could find itself sidelined in a region where it once had strong counterterrorism partnerships. None of this changes the hard truth. The fight in Burkina Faso will be long and costly. Even with modern equipment, counterinsurgency in the Sahel is a grueling, resource-draining endeavor. Insurgent groups are adaptive. They study their opponents, change tactics, and use the terrain to their advantage. This is why military modernization has to be paired with broader strategies: community engagement to prevent recruitment, investment in infrastructure to improve governance reach, and cross-border cooperation with neighbors facing the same threats. If the new Chinese weapons become part of a comprehensive strategy, they could tip the balance. If they're treated as a silver bullet, they could become expensive trophies in a conflict that drags on. For Captain Ibrahim Troaré, this arms deal is more than a tactical move. It's a statement about Burkina Faso's sovereignty. By sourcing weapons from Beijing, he's showing the world that his government will not be constrained by historical alliances or external lectures. Whether that gamble pays off will depend on more than the performance of VN-22BS and SR-5S. It will depend on whether he can deliver security, stability, and economic progress to a nation hungry for all three. The Sahel is no longer just a frontier of conflict between insurgents and states. It's a competitive arena for global powers. Every convoy that arrives from Beijing, Moscow, or Ankara is more than a shipment of steel and ammunition. It's a stake in Africa's future security architecture. For Burkina Faso, the arrival of Chinese armor is both a practical necessity and a geopolitical declaration. The age of relying on a single partner is over. The challenge now is to ensure that this diversification strengthens, rather than fragments, the nation's long-term security and independence. Burkina Faso's Chinese-made armored convoys are more than a tactical upgrade. They're a strategic message. The Sahel, once an exclusive playground for Western defense deals, is now an open arena where China, Russia, and Turkey compete for influence. For Troaré, this is about sovereignty and speed, getting results without political strings. But it's also a gamble. New suppliers bring new dependencies. Whether this move strengthens Burkina Faso's security or locks it into another cycle of reliance will depend on what comes next. If you found this analysis eye-opening, hit like, share it widely, and subscribe for more deep dives into Africa's evolving power plays.